Genesis chapter 25. Please, if you'll go ahead and turn there. We were looking at this text last week. So we have the birth of Esau and Jacob beginning at verse 19. And of course, they had been long promised. Now, before we jump into that, just as a quick reminder, earlier in chapter 24, let's see. Why am I not seeing it? Rebecca has the vision. It's actually in 25. I'm sorry. In 25, verse 23. I just overlooked it. So, after becoming pregnant with the boys, God provides a prophecy about these two young men. You remember in verse 23, God said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. And of course, that's referring to the Israelites through Jacob and the Edomites through Esau. All right, so these 2 nations. He says 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. And that's a key word there. What does that divided? What does that imply? Conflict, right? And so these 2 brothers, descendants, and even the brothers themselves, are going to be divided from one another. It says so that's the first key. And then the second key is the one shall be stronger than the others. Which one? The younger. The younger shall be stronger. The older shall actually serve the younger. And so that's really important as you go forward. Now, we are not told, and to my knowledge, Scripture doesn't reveal this, I don't know if she ever told Isaac. Now, you might rightly assume she did, but we're never given an account where Rebekah shared this with Isaac. So I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to come back to that. So, very key prophecy here about the 2 boys. Now, as you continue reading, we read about the birth. Esau, of course, is born first. Just moments, literally nanoseconds before Jacob. How do we know it was Jacob quickly followed? He was holding on, right, as they pulled Esau out. It's he's just hanging on for dear life. It's like a child who's grabbed hold of your keys and won't let them go, right? You're wrestling around your house with your phone from your child or something. They want to hold on to that. Well, he's holding on, and of course that's where the name Jacob comes from. It literally kind of implies the idea of heel grabber or supplanter. Those are the key ideas. So you have Jacob and Esau being the older. They're both born. Verse 27 gives us a diversity of interests between the 2 boys. Esau, a very outdoorsy kind of guy. He's a hunter. He's a man of the outside world. He also seems to be very much of an extrovert, right? Very extroverted. With Jacob, it's the opposite. He doesn't seem to really care as much about the outdoors. He's more of an introvert. Plus, he's also more of a deep thinker, it seems to be, than his brother. And that seems to come up when you get to the end of this chapter. So as far as the boys' young life, that's our glimpse into their childhood. The next time we see them is at the end of chapter 25, when, I don't know how old, but Esau has been out hunting, doing what he loves to do, and he comes in. This is where we left off last week. He finds Jacob doing what? Cooking a stew. Interesting kind of wordplay here again. You may remember with Esau. The word Esau means what? Right? No, that Esau means hairy. Edom means red, right? And so this stew here, that you see that word, the same kind of derivative of Edom here used for the stew. So you get the idea of a red stew. Some kind of lentil stew. You think of a lentil being something like a pea, right? Something kind of like that. And so he's cooking the stew. It must have smelled pretty good because he comes in, verse 30, he says, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Notice the explanation the writer gives us. Therefore, his name was called Edom. Do you ever wonder why his people aren't called Esauites? Why are they called Edomites? Well, according to Moses here, the author of Genesis, that came from this event with the red stew. And so that's the name there with Edom. And so he has the two names like many Bible characters do. So you see Esau and Edom connected. So he comes in, smells the stew. He's what? Very hungry, at least seemingly to him. He's so hungry, he's willing to do what? Give up his birthright. Jacob says in verse 31, "Sell me your birthright now." And Esau said, "I'm about to die. Of what use is that birthright to me?" And so Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore to him and what? Sold his birthright. And then he gives him the stew, he eats, and he's great. Now, you notice the end of verse 34. Thus Esau what? Despised his birthright. Now, let's talk about birthright for a minute. You may already know this, but what's meant by birthright? Now, there's two terms before you explain that. There's two terms that are deeply connected, birthright and blessing. Those two things are deeply connected. We see that in chapter 27. Later on, as Isaac's getting older, he's going to give his blessing. Well, blessing and birthright, there's a deep connection between the two. They're slightly different, but there's a deep connection. What does birthright have to do with? Anybody know?
The birth order.
What?
The birth order.
So it is connected to birth order, it's true.
And you get
Turner? Inheritance, right? Think about the young man in Luke's gospel who the prodigal son we call him. What did he come and ask for? His inheritance. What's he asking for? His birthright. He wants his father to go ahead and count out whatever was due to him. He's the younger, so he would have gotten how much? He would have gotten less. How much?
He would have got a third of everything.
Yeah, if you think about the inheritance being divided up, the way it was divided up, and the way the numbers work out, is the older. In this scenario, we have two children. If you have more than that, of course, it's not really a third. It gets divided up a little differently. But in this case, there's two sons. The older son would get double the portion of the younger. That's where you come up with 2/3 versus 1/3. So you're doing fractions again. Sorry. Go back to trigonometry, right? Algebra. You go back to those fractions. But he would essentially have gotten a third, being the younger. And that was what would have been due to Jacob. But now all that's been thrown on its head because Esau despised his birthright. Go over in your Bibles, if you will, hold your place. Go to Hebrews chapter 12, and I want us to look at verse 16. There's a warning given about this kind of attitude that Esau has in regard to special blessings. In Hebrews chapter 12, in the book of Hebrews, for those who've done your study on it, what is the book of Hebrews? What's one of the very main themes of that book? What is the Hebrews writer trying to do throughout his writing?
One out the faithful.
He's what?
One out the faithful.
One out. Say it one more time.
The faithful.
Uh-huh.
Faithful, and especially in chapter 11.
Yeah.
In Hebrews, and he's trying to keep the Jews from going back into.
Okay, there's the key. It's the main portion of the book is about don't go back, right? Don't leave the faith. He's trying to even call back those who have gone back. And so It's about not giving up the great blessing of faith you've been given. Okay, so that kind of plays into this. I just wanted to cover that real quick. So let's go. As he gives warnings about not drifting away, verse 3, he warns about becoming faint-hearted, about growing weary in your Christianity. Now go down to verse 16. Let's start at verse 15. Let's just read this. So he writes, "See to it that no one fails to obtain" what? The grace of God. He doesn't want them to fail to obtain the grace of God. "That no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled." Right? Those who go back into sin have what? Once again become defiled with sin. He said, don't want that. Verse 16, "That no one is sexually immoral," right? That's one way of going back into sin, is becoming sexually immoral as a Christian. Don't do that. "Or" what? And notice the word he uses. What's the last part of that phrase?
King James.
What does it say?
Profane.
Profane. What is that one you have there, Miss Virginia? What does it say? Unholy. So those words, profane, unholy, they're the same idea there, right? Becoming unholy like who? Esau. Why is he unholy? He sold his birthright for one meal. And notice what the Hebrews writer says. He's unholy because of that. That seems like, when you initially read that, is, man, that's very harsh language for just selling your birthright. Isn't that your own choice? What's the implication, Turner?
Well, it sounds like it's not good, but, in Hebrews 11:20, it reads, "By faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come." But however, if you back up to Romans 9:13.
So hold that 11 to 20. Just FYI, hold on to that. We'll come back to that in a little bit.
And then if you back up to Romans 9:13, Esau's hated. If you go to Malachi 1:3, there again he's hated. But if he's in, a lot of times if he's in chapter 11, you kind of think, well, he made it, because it didn't say that.
No, but the faith is on Isaac, not on Esau, right?
Right.
Right. And then in chapter 12, what's the real problem here is the fact he chose something physical over something spiritual.
Yeah.
And I know inheritance is physical. I get that. But according to what God says, there's something deeper to that. And I think it goes back to, why did God choose, and he did, Jacob over Esau? This is why. Esau was a man of impurity. Hebrews says he was unholy. And so God made the choice to choose Jacob over Esau, like God chose David over Saul, right? God made that choice. And this is why. It's not because of anything innate about them. It's about what? Their choices. And Esau chose to be a man of the world rather than a man of God. And we see that continue to play out as we keep going forward. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a question. Okay, so basically we debate about this all the time. She was like, well, Esau is probably like half like starving to death, and when he sold his birthright. And I was like, no, it just sounded like he was just exhausted and wanted some stew, and Jacob kind of like convinced him to sell his birthright because he just wanted some stew. And he was willing to sell it. And she was like, no, Jacob tricked Esau. I was like, no, he didn't. He obviously
So-
wanted to, not because he was starving.
Yeah, so yes, I think he's being dramatic, like a dramatic teenager. We've all had teenagers, right, or been around teenagers. Can teenagers and even adults sometimes be a little overly dramatic? His father was very wealthy. It wasn't as though there was not food in his home. He just did not account the deep spiritual meaning of what he was doing. I believe in Esau's mind, he just thought he could get it back. And it plays out later where I think that may have been the case, because he thought he was going to get it at the end. But he now, Jacob, as we move forward, is not, he's not as pure, right, as the, what's the old saying, pure as the driven snow or whatever. He's not perfectly innocent and everything, but in this instant, I don't think he's at fault.
The fact that Jacob wouldn't give his brother food without extracting something that he understood to be valuable from his brother shows that he was not a character that was really high on the pedestal of integrity.
Well, yeah.
But the other thing that is impressive me in here is the fact that not only did Esau not value his birthright, but he devalued it so much that for one meal, for one morsel of food, which is virtually nothing, he gave up that which is very precious.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Well, it's interesting too, the verse right before verse 29, talking about he comes in from the field and was faint, is talking about how great his venison is and how his dad loves it.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good cook himself, right? I just don't think, that from all the evidence, Isaac was a very wealthy man. There would not have been a lack of food in his home. So.
Well, the scripture says God made the choice while they were still in the womb, where either one had not done good or evil, that the selection might be by choice of God, not by man. So to some degree, the order change was because God wanted to demonstrate that the seed coming forth wasn't that which was a natural process, but was an unnatural process, both in the birth of Isaac and also in the selection of Jacob.
I'm thinking about that. Yeah, I'll stew on it. Yeah. Bring you back to the text. That was a great transition, wasn't it? Yeah, Turner, go ahead.
You gotta lay some of this to the feet of his mother too.
Yeah, we're going to come back to her. So hold on to Rebecca. Another one that's not perfectly pure. Nobody in this is perfectly pure, by the way. So this is like, if this was on television today, it would definitely be it'd be like a soap opera kind of deal. And it only gets worse as time goes forward. So let's go to chapter 26. Now, when I first read 26, I was like, wow, this seems like a weird chapter here. It kind of breaks up the story a little bit. But I actually think there's some super significant things going on. I'm not going to cover all the detail, though, so you can be mad at me later. And if there's one nugget in there you really wanted to cover. I'm going to cover a couple of things. Number one, in the first 5 verses is God reiterating his promise to this time to Isaac. Now, he had done that through Abraham, and now God gets a chance to reiterate his promise about what 3 things? A land promise, a people promise, and a seed promise, right? Those 3 promises. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those. We've kind of done that before. But the significance is God is now saying it not just to Abraham, but now it's to Isaac. Later on, he'll reiterate it to Jacob, not Esau. And so we go later in the chapter. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but we have Isaac now coming into Gerar. And who's the reigning king of that area? Abimelech, right? So Abimelech seems to be not a particular name, but a title. We see that throughout Scripture with Candace in the New Testament. Candace was a title. With Herod was a title. Caesar, became a title in Rome. So there are lots of times when you would have royalty take on titles as they might almost appear to us as names. But Abimelech, this is not the Abimelech of Abraham. This is a different Abimelech. Well, but you have a very similar situation. So if I can summarize it real quick, they travel into land and Isaac gets worried about what? what? Who? The beauty of Rebekah, and he's worried about someone killing him in order to get Rebekah. Right? That's almost exactly what happened with Abraham, wasn't it? Slight difference this time. When Abraham lied and said, "This is my sister," there was a grain of truth in that, right? Because she was his half-sister. However, with Rebekah, is there a grain of truth in it? No. He just straight up lied. She is related to him, but they're not brother and sister in any connection. They're cousins, if you will. But one thing I find interesting is you notice how one lie has now become a little bit bigger. You have Abraham lying, being deceitful, and now you have Isaac being straight up lying. Now I want you to keep that in mind as we get into the next chapter, as we see that deception grow in their family. What the father does, the son sees. Be careful, little eyes are watching you. And was this something that Isaac had learned from his father? Quite possibly. Well, as you read the rest of the chapter, again, I'm not going to get into it, but there is this argument over wells. The people of the land keep trying to drive Isaac away. He keeps digging wells. They keep coming behind him and claiming them, and then essentially filling them in. Eventually, until he finally gets to one place, and they don't come and complain, and so he's able to establish a well there and a lifestyle there. As the chapter as his time in the chapter comes to a close, he and Abimelech agree to a pact, a covenant with one another that they're not going to do what? They're not going to harm one another. Abimelech obviously sees what God is doing through Isaac and that God is blessing him, that Yahweh is with him. And so he doesn't want to be harmed. And so he kind of, they make this pact together. In doing so, he kind of lies because he says, "I've done you no harm." Right? That's not necessarily true, but Isaac does agree to the pact. And then when you get to the last couple of verses, I want to read these because I do think, again, it goes back to the overarching narrative that we're looking at the character of Esau. So, when Esau was 40 years old, also notice the connection to Isaac. How old was Isaac when Isaac and Rebekah married? He was 40 years old. Well, here Esau marries at 40. He took, but you have one extension. He took Judith, the daughter of Beeri, the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basmath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. So what do you see here? Right, he's got more. Well, okay, that's one thing. We'll come back to that. But the one thing that I see is he's marrying two women at the same time. Now, this has not been done by Isaac or by Abraham, has it? Now, one kind of caveat is with Abraham and who? Hagar, right? Now, they had a kind of a weird relationship where she was kind of like a second wife to him, a second-class wife, while he was married to Sarai. But here, he just marries straight up two women. Now, I know that seems like a very slight difference. It is very slight, but there's a little bit of a difference that he marries these two women. I just want you to keep that in mind. As we go through, you watch the expansion of the sin, right? As generations come, what was allowed in one generation expands in the next. And there's deeper corruption as you move forward until you get to, later on, you get with Jacob. He has a lot of wives, right? And then his children from there on. So but just keep that in mind. So the other part was what Miss Regina had mentioned. They're also what? Hittite women. Hittite women. And what's significant about that? Well, there's no Israelites yet, but they're not from the family of Abraham. They're not. They're women of Canaan. And you remember with Abraham, he married, in his family. With Isaac, the servant was sent back for Rebekah. But now with Esau, he just decides he's going to marry these two women. Now, I don't know these two women. They might have been wonderful people, I guess. But what's the problem with what he's done?
They don't know God.
They don't know Yahweh. At least in the family of Abraham, they knew Yahweh.
Okay.
And whom we marry has a deep impact on our lives, does it not? And again, notice the choice of Esau. Instead of trying to go closer to God, he's going further away. I'm sorry, I'm out of time, Jody. And then you get this last tagline as I close out. They made what? Life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. We're not told how. It may have been their idolatry, but honestly, we have no idea. When you get married, it's not just about you and your spouse. You're bringing together families. And sometimes that can be difficult, right? And so whatever they were doing, they made life difficult. The text in the English Standard translates it bitter. Bitterness of spirit is a literal translation of it there in the Hebrew. And so that's kind of, again, shows us a picture of who Esau is. All right, quickly we'll...
Well, it seems like to me that Abraham sent to his family to get a bride for Isaac. Isaac didn't do the same thing for his son. He didn't send back his son. And my take on Esau is that Isaac would have been grieved because he didn't take a bride from among their own people. That would have caused him great grief.
Yep. And he didn't wait and also we could explore this so much more, but he didn't wait for Isaac, right? He just went out and did it as an indication. With Jacob waits to marry until his father sends him. Isaac waited to get married until Abraham arranged it. This was a period of time when there was arranged marriages. He seems to have gone out of that path, Esau does, to marry these two women. They're obviously women that Isaac would not have approved of.
And also, like you were saying, like Abraham, he made Hagar his wife because they wanted to make sure he had a child because they didn't really believe in God's promise, I guess. Well, Rebecca. Oh, I keep both of them because why else would you bring in another woman?
You're talking about Sarah.
Oh, me, Sarah. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, there was a reason why he married her after. He didn't marry her at the same time as he married Sarah. So
That's right.
so yeah, I get it.
It was all a part of their sin that they committed, yeah, which caused a lot of problems. Later on, Esau's going to marry a daughter of Ishmael, which would be kind of interesting too. And it's interesting why he does it. But we'll look at that in chapter 27. Again, good. Huh? What's that? So as we close out, again, thank y'all so much for being here and taking part in this discussion. We want to, of course, provide an opportunity for anybody who was not able to partake of the Lord's Supper. At this time, is there anybody we missed? All right. Well, again, thank y'all for being here. We're going to dismiss from this class period, and then we're going to let the young men come up and lead some singing.